I'm assuming that you've heard about the NAR's proposed settlement in the major class action lawsuit involving real estate commissions they announced on March 15th. If you haven't seen my video to explain the facts on that, go ahead and check that out. I'll link that right here for you for your convenience. But I'm going to cover in this video specifically the short-term and long-term impacts on buyers. So I think that's the most important thing right now just to understand, because I feel like they're actually the party that gets hurt the most with these proposed changes, home buyers who are already facing the headwinds of higher interest rates and higher home prices than they've seen really in the history of real estate. So I'm going to share my screen with you so you can follow along here and take some notes as well, or screenshots if that's helpful for you as well. If you're thinking about buying a home this year or in the near future, or even if you're a seller that wants to kind of understand what the buyer's point of view is right now with these proposed changes, again, which may happen maybe in several months at the earliest mid-July of 2024, I'm going to dig into those details so you can kind of understand a buyer's perspective, and if you are a buyer, again, what you're going to be facing if these changes go into effect, if and when the proposed settlement is approved by the court. So there's two main proposed changes that will affect buyers. We'll go through the negative and positive impacts of that. As I mentioned, mostly negative here, but the main two changes, first of all, buyer agent commission can't be offered in the MLS. Second, the other change that is proposed is buyers and their agents must sign a written agreement before starting the home buying process. So let's take these one at a time. First of all, if the buyer agent commission can't be offered in the MLS, if this proposed settlement is approved by the court, that will be the case. One implication for buyers is that buyers and their agents will have to negotiate commission with sellers and their agents on a case-by-case basis. So this means as a buyer, when you write an offer, you're going to have to negotiate your agent's commission with that. Of course, your agent is going to help you write the offer and will have either an addendum or some sort of standard language that they would put into the contract to add that as a term of the contract to purchase as a negotiating point as well. If the buyer agent commission, again, can't be offered in the MLS, second implication, buyer agent commission may be a key term for sellers to consider, especially in multiple offer situations. So right in line here with the logic, if you put yourself in the shoes of a buyer in a multiple offer situation, if you are negotiating commission with the offer and there's multiple offers, some of those buyers may have an agent, some of them may not. Some of the buyers that have an agent may be paying their agent out of pocket, may have the extra cash to do that. Maybe you don't have that extra cash, so it puts you in a difficult situation. The sellers, in most cases, aren't necessarily going to be opposed to paying a buyer agent commission as long as the net proceeds that they get is the best that they can possibly get. So it depends on the seller, of course, but I think most sellers are not going to really worry about all the particulars of who's getting paid what, as long as they're getting the best net proceeds and the other terms that are important to them, maybe the timing of a closing and inspection terms and things like that. But some buyers may opt to not use an agent if they can't afford to pay their own agent, and if they think that they're put in a bad position in a multiple offer situation where their offer may not get accepted because of that concession that they're asking the sellers to pay for their agent's commission. They may just decide to make their offer more attractive to sellers. They're not going to use an agent. And unfortunately, if they do that, these buyers will not have the benefits of professional representation. Depending on your experience buying a home, especially if you've had a bad experience with a buyer agent before, that might not worry you too much. But if you have had a situation where you've had a really good agent that's really helped you along the way, helped you get your offer accepted, helped you find the right home, helped you navigate all the problems that come up during a home purchase throughout the whole process, I think you would understand the benefits of professional representation. At the very least, having a second set of eyes, a professional who does this every day to make sure they're in your corner representing your interests and making sure as a buyer that you don't get taken advantage of. Much in the same way that when you go to buy a new car and you go to a dealership, you don't have an agent representing you, and you might feel nervous that maybe you're not making the best financial decision. Maybe you feel like you got your arm twisted and you got kind of forced into a bad deal. That would be even more negative for you, an even bigger issue if it was a house instead of a car, because of course houses are typically a lot more expensive than cars, so a much bigger mistake if you get taken advantage of when you're buying a home and you don't have representation. Third potential implication if buyer agent commission isn't offered in the MLS is that buyers may have to pay some or all of their agent's commission. As a result of these negotiations, if the sellers are not willing to pay for any of the buyer agent commission, or are only willing to pay some of it due to the negotiations, the buyers are going to have to plan for extra out-of-pocket expenses, extra cash to bring to closing to compensate their agent, again, if they decide they still want that representation, if it's worth it to them. Fourth implication here, if buyer agent commission can't be offered in the MLS, is that buyers may have fewer listings to choose from. So if they can't afford to compensate their agent, and if they're not getting much help from sellers, maybe they've written some offers and they've been rejected on that or not gotten all of it covered, and they just don't have the cash for their down payment and their lender costs and their buyer agent commission, they may have to start limiting the homes they look at. They may have to pre-screen those listings, have their agent call the other agent, find out if they're offering any compensation for buyer agents, if they can help the buyers with that expense. And for those listings that sellers are not offering any help with that, those buyers may have to avoid those listings. They might have to just stick with the ones that are offering buyer agent commission, which of course limits the choices that buyers would have in that situation. Now, in this case, of course, maybe some buyers would opt to not use an agent because they want to make sure they have all of their listings as a choice for them. They don't want to limit it to the ones that are offering buyer agent commission. But some sellers aren't offering to pay that. Buyers who can't afford to pay for it themselves may have to find other homes. So we kind of covered that already. But again, 4 potentially negative implications if buyer agent commission can't be offered in the MLS. If you have any comments here, feel free to drop those here below the video. If you have any positive feedback as far as what would be a positive impact of this change. I don't really see or haven't been able to come up with in the limited time we've had here in the last couple of weeks any positive implications for buyers that with buyer agent commission not being offered in the MLS, other than maybe just having to educate themselves a little bit more on how the whole process works. And so through that education, they're a little bit smarter about how the process works. The second point here, buyers and their agents must sign a written agreement before starting the home buying process. Now this one, there is a positive to that, which we'll get to at the end here. The first potential implication is buyers will have to shop for an agent before shopping for a home if they want professional representation. So some of the language in the proposed settlement actually requires buyers and their agents to have a written agreement regarding services and compensation, and it has to be a very specific dollar amount that the agent is going to get paid regardless of whether or not the seller is helping with that. So if the buyer can't convince and their agent can't convince a seller on a home they want to purchase to help with that or to cover that expense, the buyers are going to be coming out of pocket for that, and that will be a written agreement that's legally binding. So that's one of the proposed changes. I think the negative implication for that is most buyers want to look for a home first. They don't really necessarily think about an agent yet if they don't already have one in mind. They just want to go see a house, and they may not even be sure if they're ready to make a purchasing decision yet. They just want to start looking at houses and kind of get an idea of what's going on in the market, kind of walk through and kind of get an idea of what kind of houses they like and don't like. So that's typically been the process for myself, at least as a buyer's agent, that I typically meet somebody for the first time at a showing without any sort of written agreement, without any relationship. I think it's going to be difficult for buyers to feel comfortable signing a written agreement before seeing that agent or meeting them at a home to see how they kind of help them touring the home and through the process. So rather than starting the process with looking at houses, it would just have to change where there will be a consultation, maybe over lunch or coffee or at the office, just to discuss the home buying process and have to address all the services and the compensation. If the buyer does want representation, they have to sign that written agreement before looking at houses. Another implication of this change, if there's a written agreement that has to be signed before starting the buying process, before touring homes, is that buyers will have to commit to an agent and agree to compensation before experiencing the agent's service firsthand. So as a buyer, you may have a consultation, so you may get to know the agent a little bit and get a comfort level with their experience, at least based on that conversation, but you're not going to be able to see them in action, helping you to tour homes, helping you to do market analysis on homes that you like, getting partway through the offer process, or just kind of getting their overall knowledge and experience and understanding where they're at with that and whether or not you really like working with them. You'll have to commit as a buyer to an agent before you even look at a single house. That's what the settlement says. So obviously some buyers will opt to not work with an agent because they're not comfortable with this situation. In Cincinnati, at least, it's not typical that every buyer's agent requires a written representation agreement. Some of them do. I've done it sometimes, but for the most part, I haven't been having my buyer clients sign that because most of them don't want to commit to an agent. They typically are a little shy about that, and they'd rather just focus on the house. And throughout the process of showing them a few different houses and having discussions with them about the market analysis and the offer process, and maybe even helping them with an offer, whether or not it's accepted, you get a comfort level as a buyer with that agent, knowing how they work and how they can help you, and you actually experience the services, so you understand how valuable it is to have an agent in your corner. Whereas having a consultation, a discussion, and reading this agreement, you may not really fully grasp, especially if you're a first-time home buyer, whether or not you really need that help or not. And so you don't really understand how valuable it is, so you don't know if you really want to pay as much as you're agreeing to in that agreement to pay out of pocket, potentially, if the sellers of the home you buy are not willing to help you with that. And of course, if those buyers opt to not work with an agent, then they will not have the benefits of professional representation, which we talked about up here as well. If you have been through that process with a good agent, you understand that. If you've been through the buying process without an agent, you would understand as well. For those of you who've had a bad experience with a buyer's agent, you may not see much benefit to having representation, but I can tell you from experience before I was in the real estate industry as a consumer and obviously as a buyer's agent for the last several years, that there's a tremendous value to having someone who's a professional who does this every day in your corner, making sure that you don't get too emotional, too excited, that you have some objective analysis on the situation, what's the best home for you. Obviously, ultimately, you get to pick the house that you want to live in, and the agent's not going to force you either way, but they'll just be able to make sure that your interests are represented, that you don't get too emotional, too high or too low on the situation, and ultimately get you to the finish line of moving into the home that works best for you and getting the best deal that you possibly can on that as well. Another potential implication, if the buyers and their agents are required to sign a written agreement before touring homes, is buyers will have more transparency regarding how their agents are paid and what services their agents are providing. So this is the silver lining. We've talked a lot about negative implications because I think most of the implications for buyers with this proposed settlement are negative, unfortunately. But I think a good takeaway is that buyers will have more transparency. Basically, they'll understand the process in terms of how their agents get paid, how much they get paid, and what services they're providing. So that forces the agents to have this conversation with their buyers. Now, I don't think agents were purposely trying to avoid that. It's just that it didn't need to be discussed in great detail because, first of all, buyers didn't really care because they weren't paying for those services directly anyway. Compensation for their agents has been covered customarily the last 30 years through the offer that the listing agent is giving to other brokers who bring a buyer through the MLS. And it's been not visible to consumers, but it's been totally transparent and equally applied to all brokers out there. So the agents who are helping their buyers know what the compensation is before they show the house. So there's really no need to discuss that, and there's no out-of-pocket expense. There hasn't been typically to buyers. Now, commissions have always been negotiable, so there's always been rare cases where buyers have had to consider coming out of pocket to compensate their agents, but in the vast majority of the situation, it just wasn't a conversation that needed to be had. But now it will be, because it's going to be required, and I think that's a good thing generally, although obviously most buyers don't want to sign a contract before they really get to know an agent. They will at least have to educate themselves, and the agent will be forced to have a conversation and help educate their potential buyer clients, and buyers will have a chance to kind of shop around and choose the right agent for them. But overall, they'll have a more transparent process, at least upfront, understanding what they're getting into with an agent. and make that decision whether or not they want to work with an agent, and knowing what that compensation looks like, and also the services that will and will not be provided by that agent. So there may be different service and pricing models that are offered, which we will get into in some later videos in terms of how that affects agents and the industry as a whole. So as you see, overall, the implications for buyers are pretty negative, but there is a little bit of a silver lining there. And again, none of these changes have taken effect yet, at least as of the making of this video. This is a proposed settlement as of March 15th. And so it remains to be seen if these will be changed. But a lot of the experts in the legal field have said that, based on the way this was presented and the process, the point they're at in the process, that it probably will get approved. So we're looking at implementation mid-July at the earliest, possibly a little bit later in 2024. So personally, I'm trying to incorporate some of these changes already into my business practice as much as I can with clients, as long as they're willing and able to do that as well, just to try to get ahead of the curve a little bit here. So as you can see, these proposed changes with this settlement actually have quite a huge impact on buyers, mostly negative in my opinion. If you have any questions, if you're thinking about buying now or in the near future, you want to ask me some specific questions, how those proposed changes would affect your home search, your buying process, feel free to reach out to me. The best way to get in touch is to visit my website at 513flatfee.com. Click the link to schedule a call so we can set aside some time dedicated to answering your questions and to assessing how we can best help you to achieve your real estate goals. I'm Patrick Rosser with the 513 Flat Fee Real Estate Group at Fathom Realty.